We bring in Omar Baddar. He is a member of the Arab American Institute's National Policy Council. He joins me now live from Washington, D.C. Good evening there, Omar. What's the reaction there among the Arabs living in the U.S. to what's happening?
I think there is complete outrage at both the way the media covers this, with almost exclusive focus in the United States on Israeli victims of Hamas violence, but hardly any coverage of Palestinian victims of mass Israeli terrorism that is flattening huge parts of the Gaza Strip. And even more outrage with the White House and with the American political establishment that is saying that they stand in support of Israel because there is never an excuse for attacks on civilians, and yet they are supporting Israel as Israel launches these massive airstrikes that are devastating Gaza's civilian population and acts of mass terrorism that the U.S. is effectively funding through unlimited and unconditional U.S. military funding for the Israeli government. That is an absolutely horrific situation that people are very, very rightly upset about, and a level of hypocrisy coming out of Washington that is honestly unrivaled in any other situation, where Israel is constantly being treated as a country that is above the law and above any rules, that gets to behave however it wants without any meaningful accountability of any sort.
And U.S. Secretary of State Blinken, he's on a tour to the region. He just landed in Jordan just a couple of hours ago. What do Arabs living in the U.S. expect Blinken to do now in this situation?
Look, unfortunately, the Biden administration has proven that it does not have the backbone to place meaningful conditions on Israel and control its conduct. I think these visits, the public expressions is basically all you can see from them. There is very limited in terms of it's hard to know what's going to be said behind the scenes. But given this full-throated comments from Blinken, and by the way, the lie that Blinken said about Hamas using human shields, it is Israel that has had a very long policy of using human shields, even though the Israeli Supreme Court struck down Israel's use of Palestinian children as human shields. The practice actually has continued and been documented by major human rights organizations. This rhetoric coming out of Blinken and from the White House is clearly indicating that the U.S. is going to put no restraints on Israel whatsoever. And this is precisely the way we got here in the first place. The reason why we're stuck in this situation is because Israel has been imposing a suffocating siege on the people of Gaza, imposing a system of military occupation and apartheid over Palestinians everywhere. And this illusion that Israel can solve this issue militarily, and that by just encouraging them and loosening the constraints on them to behave even more brutally towards Palestinians is going to provide us a path towards peace, is a completely delusional approach that we need saner people to step in and wake up out of.
Now, seeing these images that we're receiving from the region, what's your reaction?
It is utterly devastating and shocking. I mean, Gaza was already in ruins before this crisis even began. Half of Gaza's population is children. Half of the adults in Gaza are unemployed. 97% of the water was undrinkable. They barely got any electricity. They can't move in and out of the Gaza Strip. There is no economy to speak of. And now, to add this devastating siege on top of it, being tightened to this extent, where people are being denied water completely and denied food completely and electricity entirely, this is, and to see this kind of massive bombardment and collapsing entire buildings on top of large civilian areas and having entire families wiped out, we are witnessing massacres and horror on an unspeakable scale. And to have the White House and so many of these countries that claim to stand for civilization and democracy and human rights support these policies without adequate criticism is an utter horror and shock. And I think people of conscience everywhere should be doing everything they can to speak out against it and demand that Israel be held to the rules of international law, to respect Palestinian human rights, and to do everything it can to protect civilians, which so far it has never done. And that's precisely the path that's going to lead to the kind of despair in Gaza that's going to produce the next generation of militants who want to exact revenge. And we're going to be stuck in this cycle of violence for a very, very long time.
So is that what you're seeing sort of in your crystal ball for the future? Is that where we're heading?
That is, unfortunately, that's precisely the trajectory, I think, right now, even with the prospect of this expanding into broader violence, if other parties in the region get involved. There is this, again, it's one of the definitions of insanity is trying the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. Israel has been trying to pacify Palestinians to get them to settle to be a people without land, without rights, without dignity, without self-determination. And they've thought for decade after decade that if only they could squeeze them a little bit more and bomb them a little bit more and threaten them a little bit more, that they're going to get them to be subdued. Well, it's time to wake up out of that delusional dream, understand that no people anywhere in the world would accept to live the way Palestinians have been living, and that this is absolutely is set to renew the violence over and over again until Palestinians are recognized as equal human beings who are deserving of the same dignity and respect and human rights that Israelis enjoy. That justice is the only thing that can deliver us out of this cycle of violence that cannot lead. There can't be a long-lasting peace without resolving the underlying injustice that is driving this conflict, and that is precisely Israeli government policy of occupation and apartheid over Palestine.
Omar Baddar in Washington, D.C., thank you so much for joining us here on TRT World.
Thank you.